Welcome to Cyber Culture Interface. Today we continue the certification review of ISC2 certified in cybersecurity. And in this video, we are looking at domain 3, which is the access control concepts. The focus of this domain, which is access control concepts, answers three basic questions. And these are who, why, and how. So in this domain, we are looking at who gets access and what do they access. So when you're talking about access control, you are determining who is the person that is trying to access something and what kind of access do they have. The second question is why access is necessary. Why does this subject or this person need the access? And then the third question is how to manage the granted access. So when you are studying ISC2 certified in cybersecurity exam and you are taking domain 3, these three questions should be at the back of your mind in everything. We are talking about who is accessing what and why are they accessing it and how is this access being managed. So there are three key elements of access control: the subject, the object, and the rules. So the object or the subject talks about the first question, which is who. So when you are talking about who is accessing some resources within your network or resources within your organization, this is the subject. Who is the person in question trying to have or gain access into something? Then the object, what is this person trying to access? This is another key question or key element of access control that is taken up, described in this domain. What objects? Is the person trying to access video? Is the person trying to access documents? Is the person trying to access a database? What object? What is the person trying to access? Then the third element is the rules. How and when? How should everybody within the organization access a particular database? And when? For instance, an administrator, the IT administrator of an organization will have a different access or different method for accessing a database compared to if the front desk officer wants to access the company's database. When and how will also be determined. Another example is maybe a staff or an IT support staff may have an access even outside the normal working hours to certain resources within the organization because of the rule. Maybe as an IT support staff, there are other things that the person will be able to do outside closing hours, but the front desk officer will not be able to access. So these are the rules. These are the things that guides our access. So these three key elements are very important for you to note in ISC2 certified in cybersecurity domain 3. The subject, which is the who, the object, the what, and the rules, which is how and when. And then always note trustworthiness and the need for access also determines how access is controlled. That is, for an entity that is trying to access something, what is the level of trust that the person has? And then the need for the information the person is trying to access or the subject in question is trying to access will all determine how access is being controlled within the organization. Then there are several concepts discussed in domain 3 that you need to take note. First concept I would like to mention here is defense in depth. So we are talking about information strategies that integrates people and technology, and then the operations capabilities to establish different barriers across multiple layers and missions of the organization. So when you're talking about this defense in depth, we are talking about the strategy that combines the technology, the people, and the operations. And then how do you set barriers across different layers and the missions this organization is trying to achieve? You need to understand this concept and have it at the back of your mind when you are studying. So this concept applies to applies multiple countermeasures in a layered fashion in order to fulfill security objectives of the organization. It should also be implemented to prevent or deter cyber attack, but it cannot guarantee that an attack will not occur. So when you have a defense in depth strategy in place, it also is just for the purpose of prevention and it's not guaranteeing that an attack will not occur. So it's often said that there's no way to stop a cyber attack from happening All you can do is to limit the impact or to prevent, but eventually an attack may happen or always happen. But you need to have things in place like what we did looked at in domain 1 and domain 2, how to mitigate the risk of when it happens. So another thing about defense in depth is how it applies to the types of physical, logical, and technical and administrative controls or administrative access controls that you have in place. So you need to understand how defense in depth applies to the different type of access controls, which is the physical, the technical, and the administrative control. Another concept you need to understand is the principle of least privilege. So in domain 3, users should only have minimum access necessary to accomplish their job. So this is what principles of least privilege is talking about. That is, if you're a front desk officer, you don't need the right to access the financial database of the organization. So you need only the privilege to do the things that are specific to your roles. That is this principle of least privilege, and its importance. The importance of this principle should be understood as a part of domain 3. So if you are studying for your exam, you need to understand the importance of the principle of least privilege. So another concept you need to understand is privileged access management and how it relates to risk and the CIA triad. If you remember in domain 1, we talk about the CIA triad, which is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So you need to know how privileged access management, how it relates to risk and this CIA. So some of the things you need to understand under this concept is privilege and access management reduces risk by allowing admin privileges to be used only when needed. So if you're a cybersecurity professional and you are granting access or privileges to users, you need to set rules in place so that it is only when this privilege is needed that you grant access. For example, because someone is an accountant or the accounting officer of an organization does not mean the person should just have access to your financial database 24/7. The reason for use or the need should arise before the person can access such a database. So this is how this is the concept. This is what this point is explaining under this concept. Another thing you understand is privileged access management provides confidentiality by limiting the need for administrative access that is used during routine business. So what you're saying here is that the access that an admin will even have during a business routine or during routine operations within your business. So there's a confidentiality, that this privileged access management provides, by limiting the need for you to access, certain administrative privileges during business operations, especially operations that are kind of routine operations. So this helps to monitor access or to control access. Another point under this concept that you need to understand is privileged access management ensures integrity by allowing authorized administrative access during approved activities. So admin access can be granted or can be controlled in such a way that is only when an activity that has been approved is being conducted that someone will have admin access. So these are all part of understanding how privileged access management relates to risk and the CIA triad. So another concept we need to take note of is the privileged access. Or another point under privileged access management, how it relates to CIA triad and the risk is that the privileged access management confirms availability by providing access only when needed. So this idea of having access unlimitedly does not work here. So it means it's only when you need the access that your access is granted. And once you are done with whatever task you are conducting, the access is withdrawn from you. So the next time you need to carry out such operations, you will request for access again. So these are different ways of ensuring that access is controlled to resources. Another concept you need to understand is the difference between a regular user account and a privileged user account. Another concept you need to understand is segregation of duties. So which means that duties in an organization should be segregated. Someone should be handling the front desk, someone should be handling finances, someone should be handling things that have to do with maybe relating with customers in a different way. So duties should be segregated so that the access that each individual can have within an organization to resources will depend on the duties they are carrying out. And also the difference between regular user and a privileged account user should also be understood. A regular user account will not have the same access to resources that a privileged account user will have. So these are things you should note in this concept. Another thing to understand is two-person integrity. That is, two-person integrity is talking about having more than one person to verify, activities or operations or access that someone is trying to get to resources. So another concept that you need to understand is how users are being provisioned from being hired to being terminated. So there's a process that every user within an organization is taking through, or how their access is being managed from the process or from the point of being hired to being terminated. So some of these things you need to understand. For a new employee, for instance, an account is created for a new employee. And when you're talking about onboarding, in the onboarding process, you are creating an account, which is like a baseline account for a new employee. This is something that everybody within an organization goes through. So onboarding process is a process that every new recruit within an organization goes through. So at this point, there's an account or there's a certain levels of access that people at this stage will have. Then you also need to understand that when positions are changed, accounts are being modified. So at this level, when the account is being modified, their access control needs to be understood that for such a person that is changing position, maybe from a manager to a senior manager or a general manager, their accounts will be modified and then certain privileges will have to be attached during the modification process. So another concept here or explanation at this point is temporary leave of absence means accounts should be disabled. So when somebody is going on leave and the person will not be within the organization's premises for a period of time, accounts should be disabled. This is able to control access from outside the monitoring. Because if someone is on leave, probably the IT may not be able to monitor every activity the person uses. So in such a case, an account like that can be disabled, such as a means of controlling access to organizations' resources. So for someone that is separated from an employment, still under how users are provisioned, separation of employment. Once someone is leaving an employee, the employment or is no longer an employee of an organization, such account should be deleted. Such account should not be left, hanging. These are means of controlling. Then someone when you are having what we call off-boarding, then in such a case, almost like separation of employment or someone is no longer within the employment of an organization, the account should be deleted, disabled or disabled. Of course, it has to be disabled first, then deleted, especially for when an employee is being terminated. So another concept you need to understand here in domain 3 is the physical and logical access controls and how they are combined to strengthen the overall security of an organization. So you need to have a grip of what physical controls are, what logical control are, and this logical control, logical access or physical access, how they are controlled or how the combination of both logical and physical, are being made use of in strengthening the security of an organization. So examples of physical controls can be things like security guards, where you have security guard, fences, motion detectors, you have locked doors, sealed windows, lights, cable protection, laptops, badges, swipe cards, and guard dogs, cameras, man traps, all these are examples of physical controls and alarms. So man traps is or turnstiles are the kind of doors that allows only one person to pass through at a time. Or so these are a means of these are all physical controls. Then logical or technical controls. Examples are, configuration settings. When you set the configuration of a system or a device, for instance, not to allow certain operations to carry out. These are technical controls. Or parameters stored on device. These are hardware settings. When you set the settings of an hardware to perform certain functions, these are all logical and technical controls. So there are three types of logical access controls that is talked about in domain 3. The first one is DAC, then we have the MAC, and then we have the RBAC. So the DAC is basically what we call discretionary access control, and this is implemented by the owner of the resource. So and enforced also at the subject level over objects in an information system. Basically, what we are saying, this when we talk about discretionary access control, we are saying the control or the access or the level of access that the user has is determined by the creator or the owner of the resource. For instance, if you're in your system, you created a file and you want it's at your own discretion to determine who you want to access your file. So you can set controls on a file or a database that you create and decide that, okay, I want only the principal managers in an organization or my senior managers in an organization to have access to this file. I don't want people below certain ranks within an organization to have access. Or you can say, okay, this file is open to the public, anybody can. So it's at the discretion of the owner of that resource. That is discretionary access control. Then we have the mandatory access control. So this is uniformly enforced across all subjects and objects within the boundary of an information system. So mandatory access control are usually things that are determined by the organization that bounds everybody within the organization. For instance, an organization might say that you cannot get access to the server or the server room of an organization. So this is mandatory for everybody. So if you have a swipe card or you have an access card, the access card will be limited not to be able to access that server room, for instance. So it's a mandatory access. For instance, another example is like everybody in an organization might be mandated that they can no longer access resources within the organization once closing time is reached. So this is the kind of control that is mandatory. So it is binding on everybody within the organization. Then we have what we call the role-based access control. And just like it sounds, the name, it's implemented based on the user's role, the role the user is performing within the organization. For instance, an accountant will have a different control on their access compared to a field engineer. The field engineer, the kind of controls or the limitations the field engineer will have will also be different from what the driver within an organization will have. So depending on your role, the access control can be determined by what we call the role-based access control. And then within the domain, which is access control, domain 3 of ISC2 certified cybersecurity, the objectives, that is what every learner, what everyone that has, if you are going through this domain, if you are studying for the exam, you are expected to be able to select access controls that are appropriate in a given scenario. So these are objectives. The first objective of domain 3 is that every learner should be able to select access controls that are appropriate in a given scenario. Then you should be able to relate access control concept and processes to given scenarios. You should be able to compare various physical access controls, and you should be able to describe logical access control. And also, you should be able to practice the terminology of access control and review concepts of access control. So these are basic objectives that everybody that is attempting the exam should be able to understand after going through this domain 3. Then finally, we have the terminologies, different terminologies that you should be familiar with under this domain. The first terminology here is crime prevention through environmental design. This is CPTED, and it's basically talking about architectural approach to design of buildings and spaces such as features within your building can help to control criminal activity or attacks within the building. For instance, systems can be the building can be designed in such a way that systems are positioned, or devices that are being used by users are positioned in such a way that a working client cannot see what the person behind the computer is doing. So these are features within the building. So these are crime prevention through environmental design. This is a terminology you should be familiar with. Then we have defense in depth. We have mentioned it earlier on. Information security strategy, integrating people, technology, and operations capability to establish variable barriers across multiple layers and missions of organization. Then we have discretionary access control. I've explained this in detail. This is when a certain amount of control is left to the discretion of the object's owner. Then we have encrypt. Encrypt is the terminology that's talking about protecting private information by putting it into a form that can only be read by people who have permission to do so. Other terminologies include insider threats. This is an entity with authorized access that has the potential to harm an information system through destruction, disclosure, or modification of data. So insider threat is talking about somebody within the organization. Of course, the person has an access and the person has the potential of exposing or revealing data. Layer defense is the use of multiple controls arranged in series to provide several consecutive controls to protect an asset. It's also a term that's similar to defense in depth. So what we're talking about here is, for instance, if you want to access an organization, you first of all swipe your card at the entrance. Then after a few meters, maybe you have to do a biometric scan. Then at some point, you need to enter some PIN or login code. So these are layered defense. Then logical access control system is an automated system that controls individuals' ability to access one or more computer system resources. Maybe a workstation, maybe an handheld device, maybe an application or database, but when you're talking about logical access control, these are things that requires verifications of individuals' identity or validation of an individual's identity. You may need to put a PIN, a biometric, and this logical is usually achieved by putting in some configurations or things that are a bit technical. Then we have mandatory access control. This is control that requires the system itself to manage access in accordance with organization security policies. So these are mandatory access. I explained this earlier in the video too. Then we have physical access controls. These are implemented through tangible mechanisms like wall, fences, guard, logs, etc. These are things that physical and you can handle. And then physical access control can also be combined with logical access. So it may require you providing something physical and also something logical. Then we have the principle of least privilege. Is a term that refers to principles that users and programs should have only the minimum privileges necessary to complete the attack. That is, if you don't need access to a database, then you don't need to be granted that access. You should be granted access to things that you need only for your business. Then we have a privileged account, which is an information system account with approved authorizations of a privileged user. The role-based access controls, an access control system that sets up user permission based on their roles. Then we have terminologies like segregation of duties, which means ensuring organizational process cannot be completed by one single person. That means you have different people carrying out different functions within the organization. Then we have the term subject, which is referring to an individual or a process or a device that is causing information to flow among objects or making a system change. Then we have technical controls. Then we have the security control. These technical controls are security controls, safeguarding or countermeasures for an information system that primarily is implemented and executed by the information system through mechanisms contained in the hardware, software, or firmware. So these are things talking about configuration settings, parameters or hardware settings. Then we have what we call user provisioning. So user provisioning is basically the process of creating, maintaining, and deactivating user identities on a system. So these are terminologies you should be familiar with if you are going to sit for the exam. And as you read through or as you study and go through the domain 3, these are terminologies, concepts, and ideas that you should put in place. Thank you for watching. Once again, this is Cyber Culture Interface. If this video has been meaningful to you in any way, please like it, share, and subscribe to this channel so that we can continue to churn out better and higher quality videos. Thank you.